Hey guys, Dark Humility here. You can always catch me at twitch.tv/Dark Humility for 6 to 7 days a week of Diablo 2 action, every manner of gameplay, every manner of fun on Diablo 2 in D2R or Project Diablo 2, especially around ladder resets. As you guys probably know, we are gearing up for the April 28th ladder reset extravaganza for Diablo 2 Resurrected. And I myself will be trying to get a sorceress, or at least some character, to 99 on hardcore successfully without dying. It's going to be a great time. And yeah. Now, what we have here today is really awesome stuff. If you guys don't know, I am part of Maxroll. I create the drafts for the tier lists on Maxroll. Tier lists are kind of my thing. I'm kind of the tier list guy. And this here is everything you'll ever need to know about build power and build strength in patch 2.4. So we're releasing it literally a day before the patch is scheduled to go live. So you guys are armed with all the information. All of these tier lists will be on Maxroll as is later on. So a little bit, maybe like a week and a half after the patch goes live. So I'm here to bring this to you ASAP on YouTube so you guys can access this. This is a result of my initial drafting after doing hundreds of hours of PTR testing for patch 2.4 and the result of collaboration with our other Maxroll team members, MacroBioBoi, BT Neanderthal, and Teo. And we've all come together to verify this tier list and make adjustments as necessary to give you guys the most accurate information as to build strength in different situations. So without further ado, this is the D2R patch 2.4 tier lists, or these are the tier lists. What we have here, just to give you guys a bit of an overview, are 6 different tier lists, which, like I said again, will appear on Maxroll about a half a week, maybe closer to about a half a week before the actual ladder launches. However, I will give you guys these ASAP so you guys can understand. I love tier lists. Tier lists are my passion. I really like to compare build strength in all kinds of different ways and try to figure out what are the most meaningful ways to compare them. Before I talk about, though, like each individual list and what gets builds on a list and whatnot, I'd like to just go over which lists we have. So we have a late game tier list, which is focused on late game power, build power, pretty much maximum build power, in terms of like having best in slot items for the most part. A ladder start tier list, which is all about being able to play on a team or a solo start in the ladder, like how good a build is to start with no gear whatsoever, and to start progressing and building up your gear, what's going to do that quickly. And then you have an Uber tier list. Uber tier list is just a build that is consistent at doing Ubers, maybe cheaply does Ubers, or just really strong at doing Ubers. So some of these builds aren't very cheap, but they're just incredibly effective at killing Ubers in patch 2.4. And then we have a density destroying tier list, which all these builds are. These builds are essentially, every build on this list has some capability to clear lots of monsters quickly, especially on high player count. So high player count is the real focus of this. Basically, builds that blow up a room and how effectively they blow up a room in their best farming areas. Elite hunting is the same thing, for each build being compared against each other build in its own best farming areas or areas. But in terms of its ability to target elites, and targeting elites is really important in Diablo 2, because the elites have like the best loot tables compared to like minions and regular monsters, and normally you want to do that in players 1. Density destroying is really important in high player count because lots of monsters drop. Every monster has the highest chance to drop loot of some kind, and the faster you can clear tons of monsters, the faster you can get loot, especially in a lot of areas like the secret Cal level. And then, of course, we have the chaos preparation tier list as well, right up in here, which compares build's ability to kill the seal bosses in players 8, pop the seals, and to quickly spawn Diablo and get him to low health. so that a player that is trying to reach 99 can finish them off and then get experience as fast as possible. It's a very important thing to do. A lot of these builds are also really good at a technique called seal popping, where you pop all the seals and then you teleport through chaos, and then you teleport to the last seal, and then pop the rest of the monsters for loot, and then you can go look to see if they dropped anything good, which is especially good in high player count as well. So these are all some of the top strategies or the most important things when it comes to getting rich, getting loot, and building your characters up in Diablo 2. Getting experience, all these things are very, very important. Density destroying, elite hunting, hunting those elites, those unique monsters, um, like Blood Hungry, the Flamed, or whatnot. All that stuff is important. Ubers, getting torches, very, very important. Torches are very valuable. Builds on the Uber tier list also tend to also be very effective at getting the Annihilist charm from Diablo clone. However, every build is capable of that in the late game, so there's a little bit of overlap with some other very important Diablo 2 functions as well. But we designed these 6 tier lists. There's also going to be the Runeword tier list as well, and just an overall class comparison speedrun tier list on Maxroll as well, that you guys can check out as well once they're on Maxroll. The new runewords have been added in and whatnot. Runewords are also compared, on cost efficiency and things like that. So there's some other tier lists we got as well, some other very high quality information. All right, now we got through all that. Went through kind of an overview of kind of the philosophy of each list, the overview of the philosophy, which lists we have, why we have them, because they're effective tasks at getting rich and whatnot in Diablo 2. What we have now here, let's start with the flagship tier list, the most important one, which is what builds should you actually work towards and how strong are they compared to other builds just overall. And this is the late game PvE, player versus environment tier list. It's not a PvP tier list. We don't have a PvP tier list. It's kind of a lot in flux anyway, but it really is. PvP is highly situational. It almost always depends on the matchup anyway, so it's really hard to tier builds overall in PvP. So we're only focused here on PvE. And these builds are ranked according to their best case scenario. So what is out of these tasks, even elite hunting and density destroying, what is their best task? What is their best area? And also, how versatile is the build? That's the other major criteria besides their best task in terms of their most efficient task they perform in Diablo 2. The other thing is how versatile are they? How many tasks can they perform pretty well? Can they do Ubers? Can the same build do Ubers? With a few tweaks, can it also be good at elite hunting with some other tweaks to the build and some other items swapped in? Can it destroy density effectively? Can it clear almost every farming area in the game, or is it only limited to a few? Those are things that definitely will affect the rankings of all these builds in our overall tier list. And I think we've done. This has got to be the most accurate D2R tier list on the internet. Period. We took all these things into account, and we're very careful with how we rank these builds. I'm very happy about all the testing we did and kind of our understanding of what tasks are important, and of course how effectively each build can perform its best task and every other task that can be important for gathering loot and progressing and building builds in Diablo 2. So all right, that's what the late game tier list is all about. So let's kind of get into, I'm not going to get in too much into the nitty gritty of each tier list, but what I do want to go over is kind of some major changes in patch 2.4. You guys will be able to access this tier list yourself in the links below. So there's going to be a link in the first pinned comment and a link in the description, so you guys can literally just review this list yourself in case you don't want to review it while I'm going through it. But I'm basically going to go over some major changes. I'm going to also say when something hasn't changed. So Hammerden is still an S tier build, super highly versatile, can do pretty much anything, can clear almost any area, super high damage, super good at basically doing everything. Not one thing that it necessarily specializes in, but because it's just so versatile, and it's super good at almost every task, it pretty much has to be here. Fist of the Heavens. Fist of the Heavens, this is a big one. So this is a big one for patch 2.4. For patch 2.4, Fist of the Heavens has to be here. Before it would have been like F tier, so it moved up like all the tiers basically. The bolts before would only would you could only kill you could only the bolts wouldn't pierce before, they'd only kill undead. It was pretty janky stuff. Now it pierces through everything and it kills demons. And this ability is nasty. Not just in the late game, but you'll see in the early game as well when we go over our new tier list, the ladder start tier list, which we'll do in a second, which I went over briefly. And yeah, it's just crazy stuff. Super powerful, super effective at density clearing. Just as versatile as the Blessed Hammer Paladin, and in some cases more effective, especially for lower player counts. It's a beast. Smite Paladin is the best, most consistent build at killing Ubers. And we're talking about high consistency here. And that's just what it does the best. It's just super good at it. Nothing really rivals it in terms of like high consistency when it comes to killing Ubers, so that's why it's there. Blizzard Sorceress, throughout the entirety of the game, just super versatile, can do so many areas, super effective at elite targeting, pretty decent at clearing density as well. Can kill declone, it can do pretty much anything. Blizzard isn't usually the best skill for Ubers on the Sorceress. Ubers is challenging on a Sorceress to begin with, but that's basically the only weakness it has. You can stack tons of MF with it. It's always been in the S tier. That's not moving from patch 2.4. Lightning Sork is also the same in patch 2.4. Even more versatile than the Blizzard Sorceress. Has no immunity issues once you get Infinity. Clears the game. Has super high density clear, super high elite targeting capabilities. Can even kill the Ubers now with Double Plague, Act 5 Mercenary using Charged Bull. So this thing's a monster. Like, you can do anything with the Lightning Sorceress. Poison Nova Necromancer. It is arguable that there are very few builds, only like Lightning Fury Amazon maybe, that can rival it when it comes to clearing an entire room of enemies. It has 3 types of damage, 2 types from Corpse Explosion, Physical, and Fire. It also has poison damage, so it can clear any area, it can clear any set of monsters with a combination of Corpse Explosion and Poison Nova. It's a monstrous build for sure. The good thing about the Maxroll version of this is it has links to each build guide as well, so you guys will get to explore each build. If you guys are not familiar with the build and how it works, it's pretty awesome stuff. Goldfine Barbarian. The reason why Goldfine Barbarian here is because it is the best way to get gold in the game, and there's nothing that comes close. It's pretty much just the most effective build for gathering gold from Travancore, and that's why it has to be in there. Berserk Barbarian. It is the most efficient Players 1 elite sniping magic finder, but it is also arguably the most efficient way to prep chaos. So it's very good at sniping elite, sniping key bosses, using Howl and Berserk. It's just super effective. And you can stack crazy MF. You have a magic find. You got find item. It's just crazy. And then Lightning Fury Amazon, Lightning Sentry Assassin are always going to be... well, Lightning Fury Amazon's arguably the best density clearer in the game. And with lightning damage and Infinity in the late game can clear absolutely everything. Remember, this is the late game tier list, so best in slot using Infinity and whatnot. No problems whatsoever. Lightning Sentry Assassin has 3 types of damage as well, just like the Poison Nova. Lightning, Physical, and Fire with Corpse Explosion. And is super safe, got lots of tools, can clear anything very fast with a combination of Fire Blast and Lightning Sentry. Just super solid build. And super good at clearing Bale and all kinds of stuff, so very good stuff. Lightning Fury Amazon can even kill the Ubers itself as well. It's also like literally like hands down one of the most effective ways to kill the Ubers. And we have now into the A tiers, so this is another... These are some big changes here coming in here. I would say Fissure Druid has definitely moved up a tier. No global cooldowns anymore means it can spam all of its abilities. Fissure Druid is looking really good for patch 2.4. Nova Sorceress is looking extremely good for patch 2.4. With the extra damage and whatnot and the extra synergy that it has. Really good damage. It can even clear high player count. It can shred chaos. Lightning damage in the late game tends to be really good because you don't have many immunity issues. Lightning immunity tends to be the easiest to break with Conviction Aura. So you'll see a lot of lightning builds towards the top of the tier list in the late game for this reason. And fire builds are still pretty high up there as well. However, there's a lot more fire immunities you either can't break or struggle to do damage to. Um, but yeah, Fissure's pretty dang versatile too. I mean, Fissure's got like physical damage. Nova, you can just break almost all the lightning immunities. Hydra, with Hydra and Fireball, you do just such crazy damage. You can destroy bosses just as easily as you can clear most areas in the game. You might struggle with things like Chaos though. So they're once you go down to the A tier, the versatility drops a little bit. Its best case scenario maybe drops a little bit. Maybe it's a little less efficient due to like lack of mobility. Maybe it's not quite as fast at teleporting as some of these other builds. Maybe it doesn't have quite as much versatility in terms of killing as many areas or monsters. But these are still very, very, very strong builds. Everything in A tier is very good. These are specialty builds, these hybrid builds for Sorceress. Like Blizzard Fireball is incredibly good, for instance, in Ancient Tunnels, but it can also be used almost anywhere just simply because it's a hybrid. So it's got high versatility, and these builds tend to be better in players 1, but weaker at higher player count because they're hybridizing their damage. So it's not like quite as versatile as those S tier builds, but they're incredibly good in the areas where they can farm, and they can stack tons of Magic Find and not deal with any immunity issues. Like Fireball Nova is amazing in the pit. Fireball is just just as effective as Hydra, just in different ways. Hydra might be better against bosses, but Fireball might be a bit more clear cut for popping elites. And as you move down, these builds haven't changed either. So like the main ones that changed in 2.4, you would definitely say are like Fist of the Heavens, Fissure, Nova, and Hydra so far. The rest of these are pretty much the same. Like Dream and Zeal are really good at killing the Ubers, but they can also Magic Find, especially if you put enough mobility on them. You can target elites. You can clear density somewhat, and they have a lot of really strong scenarios. Lightning Strike might be the fastest way to kill Ubers with a full build, and it's almost as effective as Lightning Fury and Density Clear, but not quite. Lightning Fury's definitely got a little bit of an edge. But Lightning Strike might even have an edge in some other ways. Lightning Strike is a brand new build, by the way, I should mention. That does not exist without an Infinity Spear. I'd argue there's almost no point to making a Lightning Strike Amazon versus a Lightning Fury one unless Infinity Spear did not exist. But you guys can get hyped about the 2.4 Infinity Spear because that is going to be a real deal. Dragon Talon Assassin, same thing. I mean, just really good at Ubers, not quite as consistent, but that's the main thing. You can also elite target with Rift Sins, some of the variants and whatnot. Kick Sins, like Storm Lash, there's definitely a lot of things you can do with it that are really sick. Very versatile build that's very good at killing the Ubers. Some Necromancer, kind of the same thing. We have another new build here for 2.4 as well, which is the Double Throw Barbarian, or just the Throw Barbarian. And that is really good now. Lots of changes in patch 2.4 to Pierce, Quantity Replenish, and Damage, just making it overall way more effective in every player count, but especially for targeting elites and players 1. You can argue besides Berserk, it's probably the second most effective way to target elites and kill them. So Throw Barbarian's a ton of fun, really powerful in a lot of situations. And then you have Fire Blast Assassin, which is also amazing at targeting elites now. And Fire Blast is kind of its own thing now. And it definitely got a lot of bonuses to them moving some synergies around in patch 2.4. So that's definitely looking really good for Fire Blast as well. One thing I should also mention about Lightning Strike is that with all that negative enemy res on the Infinity Spear itself, you are cutting through monsters' lightning resistances like no other. It's actually really crazy. So if there's an area with a lot of lightning resistance, you can argue that Lightning Strike might be even better than Lightning Fury in some situations. So yeah, there's definitely some builds that are pretty good here. Maybe not as versatile in some situations, but as the S tier builds, but the A tier builds are looking solid. If we move on to the B tier, the versatility drops. Maybe their best case scenario drops. Holy Fire is decent at clearing density, but in really high player count, it might start to fall off compared to some of these A tier builds. But Holy Fire is looking good, especially in lower player count. Wake of Fire is looking pretty good as well. Kind of similar thing to Holy Fire in terms of its overall ability to clear density and whatnot. Zeal Sorceress, just loses a little bit of teleport frames, maybe a little bit clunkier compared to maybe Zeal Paladin or Dream Paladin. Um, and all these builds, except for Holy Fire, which definitely got a pretty big change in 2.4, and Wake of Fire, which also got a damage boost in 2.4, are all pretty much where they were before. Where it says future here, these are guides that will not be written yet on Maxroll by the time 2.4 launches, but definitely Frost Nova Sorceress could definitely be a thing for elite monster targeting in Ancient Tunnels. Um, gotta go target those elite packs, man. Targeting those elite packs is just juicy stuff. Plague Javelin, really good at clearing density, but mostly only in the cow level in the pit. If you try to do it elsewhere, it really struggles. So it definitely falls off in terms of versatility. Like, this is a poison build, and this is a poison build, but there's a big difference between the versatility and whatnot of a Poison Nova Necromancer and a Plague Javelin Amazon. And but both are very effective at clearing density. Very good stuff, just in different areas. Strafe Amazon. Strafe Amazon, I'd say, moved up a tier. Patch 2.4 promises to give it a lot more damage. There's a lot more synergies, adding, from my testing, about 2 to 3,000 like extra damage at the high end. So it's doing even better at density clearing. It's definitely very versatile as well. Being able to cast amplify damage and break almost any physical immunities. So yeah, it's really strong stuff. Corpse Explosion Necromancer, pretty much where it was before. Wind Druid were pretty much where it was before. I mean, relative to the Fire Druid. Fire Druid is now officially the strongest Druid build in the game. So the Fire Fissure Druid, whatever you want to call it, which uses all the skills now, just has way more damage output, especially in higher player count than Wind. And since there's a lot more farming areas like the Stony Tomb that are coming out in 2.4 that are so much more useful, that one's, yeah, there's definitely a pretty big difference there. Wind is still solid, though. It's solid. Lacks some teleport speed, maybe, compared to some of these top builds when it comes to elite targeting. And its ability to clear a room is, it's a lot more limited, maybe, compared to a Fissure Druid, but it's still pretty strong. They didn't change anything fundamentally, though. Just using Corpse Explosion and a Mercenary is still an effective strat. Pretty good stuff. And then you have, so Frost Nova got a damage boost, definitely looking pretty good. Warcry also got a bit of a damage boost, but also a mana cost reduction boost. So it's looking even better for elite targeting, but also for like density destroying in terms of like what it can do in the game. And since it's physical damage, you can do most areas with it, especially if you put like a Reapers on the Mercenary. Maybe you could use an Insight on the Barbarian itself. Or you could just use an Insight and just clock them in players 1 and you'll have enough damage. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of builds that are looking pretty solid in terms of like being able to move quickly and kill lots of monsters quickly, depending on what it's meant to do. And then once we go down to C tier here, we have some builds that may have even suffered from the patch. Particularly one here, Werebear Sorceress. So unless on patch 2.4 they announced that they're returning the old attack speed calculation as an option for the Werebear Sorceress, she actually arguably dropped 1 or 2 tiers, and the reason being is that she can't get her attack speed as high anymore with the new attack speed calculation for shapeshifters, and she doesn't have the benefit of the Druid Shapeshifter, who has skills that increase the attack speed. So even though now she can't be interrupted, which is nice, she is slower at killing some things, especially at a higher player count. She's still very solid at killing the Ubers, but she definitely lost some ground in patch 2.4. The rest of these builds, like Bone Necromancer, are pretty much where they've always been. Just pretty average builds. Bone just doesn't do as much damage when it comes to starting that Corpse Explosion chain as some of the other Necromancers. Frenzy and Whirlwind, they can be a bit clunky. They just don't clear through as many monsters as quickly. Same thing with Leap Attack. Leap Attack is a build that's actually a new build because of 2.4, though. So it's a brand new build that's coming onto the scene here, which you guys will see shortly, which is awesome stuff. You can leap into the fray. It does a little bit of AoE damage, and it cuts down the monster pretty effectively. And if you miss, you could use Berserk. So it's kind of like I like to joke that it's a second-rate Berserk Barbarian. It kind of is. It could be a little clunky for sure. There's definitely some clunkiness to these builds when it comes to targeting elites and clearing lots of density. Summon Druid is pretty effective, actually, and it's really only the teleport speed slows it down, but the being able to field all the summons at once in patch 2.4 makes the Summon Druid not an F tier build, probably where it was before, but now it's a really solid build. And Summon Druid is definitely a hands-off, not a lot of brains required build, and you can just you can go ham. Definitely an exciting thing to look out for in patch 2.4. And then, Fury Druid's pretty much where it was before. They did change the attack speed calculation, but it's about the same in the late game now because of how they did it for the Fury Druid. Fire Claw Druid, kind of the same thing. But he's even stronger in a lot of ways and a bit more effective because of the patch 2.4 changes. Multi-Shot did get a little bit of a boost from patch 2.4, but not as much as Strafe. I would say she's pretty much almost as strong still. But you definitely do see a bit of an improvement in the late game, which is nice. Freezing Arrow, pretty much where she always was. Extremely good at clearing density in some areas, like Ancient Tunnels, but in a lot of areas she struggles a little bit more. You have to alternate fire damage, or she's just really slow at moving around and teleporting and whatnot. Mobility definitely factors into efficiency in the late game quite a bit. I like to emphasize that once again. Kind of like the same problem Jab, Fended, and Pale Amazon has, even though it can destroy the Ubers as well, which is another build that's coming onto the scene because of patch 2.4. This is definitely one of my favorite interesting builds. You get to use like a Breath of the Dying Spear and go to town. It's a lot of fun stuff, and it's very strong. They doubled the attack speed on Defend, and they made Impale more responsive, so it can do a lot of very, very cool things now. It's pretty good stuff. Definitely recommend checking out that one. It's a nice average build, though. It's nothing too crazy in terms of its speed at doing anything. I'd say doing Ubers can be pretty fun, though. Pretty fun stuff. Phoenix Strike can also target elites. Can clear density, too, but still heavily reliant on Death Sentry, which every assassin is to some extent, but this one even more so because of how clunky it is. And then as we go down here, there's some builds that will probably be built out of Maxroll in the future. Maul Druid would be a cool thing to have for sure. I feel like the Bear Druid is definitely gaining its own identity because of not being able to be interrupted. Just attacking one attack after the other is pretty good stuff. And in patch 2.4, definitely making some very good changes, making the Maul Druid maybe not an F tier build, maybe more of a D tier build, and putting it on the map. Firewall Sorcerer is just heavily limited to boss killing any capabilities, so compared to other Sorceress approaches, it's still kind of where it is. Rabies, highly limited, basically does cows, and that's about it. But, it's pretty good at density clearing in cows. And Whirlwind Assassin, it's a little bit of a clunkier, slightly lower damage version that doesn't have Find Item of a Whirlwind Barbarian, and Find Item definitely is very important for efficiency. And then, now you get into some builds that are kind of maybe. A lot of these won't exist by the time Ladder launches yet as build guides. However, we do have a couple that do. Blade Sentinel and Fury is just really clunky, but definitely can perform functions like killing Ubers and targeting elites. Werewolf Barbarian, kind of same thing. Ubers targeting elites, but it's even worse now because kind of like the Werebear Sorceress, the Werewolf Barbarian took a big hit in terms of tiers. Simply because he's can't get his attack speed up, can't get it up, and unlike the Werebear Sorceress that can get tons of lightning and fire damage from Enchant and Devil Dream, Werewolf Barbarian doesn't have the luxury of making it a one-punch man. He's not a one-punch man. He needs to attack more times usually, and because he doesn't have Fury, which increases the attack speed of the Fury Druid, his attack speed's taking a big hit due to the patch 2.4 attack speed calculation. So because of that, unfortunately, the Werewolf Barbarian is looking pretty bad. He's gonna need some help for sure. He's gonna need some help. Hopefully they maybe reverse some of those, but that's where it stands right now before the launch, on the eve of the launch of the patch 2.4 patch. Remember, this stuff can change. I will update this listing, and Maxroll will update accordingly if there are any major changes coming on the 14th. And this link, once again, will be in the description in the first pinned comment below. So you guys can check that out once again. Some of these other builds are just kind of clunky. Just kind of slow. Dragon Tail does insane damage. It's actually crazy, but it's hard to deliver the damage, and it definitely can be difficult to do it. Not a lot of good tools to do it either. So there's just a lot of other things. Like Blaze Inferno could actually clear high player count cows, and there's some other really cool things you can do with really good gear. No Mercenary, of course, but it's still pretty clunky. So, a lot of the builds, the farther you go down, it's clunky, lacks versatility. It's not a lot you can really do with it, and when you can do it, there's still better approaches. So that's normally what happens as you go farther down in the overall late game patch 2.4 tier list. If you disagree with any of these and think there should be any major changes, obviously, let me know in the comments below if you really don't like where a build is, or if you think this is pretty solid based on what you've seen in the game. No matter what your experience is with the game, always want to see that for sure. Just keep in mind, what the tier list is trying to describe and what are the defining criteria, such as best case scenario and versatility. And let me know if you did a good job on this awesome flagship tier list. All right. So now we got through kind of the flagship one, the really, really important one. What you want to do here is we want to kind of go over our new tier list. So this is one that hasn't existed before ladders start, and so everyone's been asking about, what should they start with in the early game? What is going to be effective for gearing up more characters, building wealth in the game, allowing me to make more characters? What is going to make me rich? What is going to be fun to play in the early game and not challenging, super difficult? This tier list answers all those questions, basically. And we put the builds on this list that have some kind of starter variant in the build guides themselves, or just are solid starters. You could actually use them in a lot of scenarios. Another thing to mention about this list is builds that tend to rank towards the top maybe aren't even just good for solo play. They might also be good for team play or team play. Maybe some of them are only meant for team play, but these tend to be highly effective. Highly effective builds at supporting a team. If it's only meant for team play, it will say so next to it, which we'll get to in a moment. But some builds are just really good, or they're really high up because they do both. And these are builds that are going to be, if you build these builds to start with, you'll be able to efficiently farm and whatnot, and you'll be able to help out your team. All right, anyway, I think I've rambled or repeated myself maybe a few times. Well, I do tend to do that. Let's get into the ladder start tier list. So let's talk about the top builds and what 2.4 has changed in terms of what you might want to do. Blizzard Sorceress is still an insane approach. Just killing Mephisto and Andariel and council members and popping chests and lower crossed and cows. It just does so many things so well early on with almost no gear. And once again, having no gear is really important when you're starting out. Because if you can't do a lot with no gear, or you're struggling and you can't clear monsters or kill things quickly, you're going to struggle a lot more and you're going to farm a lot slower. Bosses are just so important for those starting items like Harlequin Crest, Shaco, Arachnid's Mesh, Storm Shield, doesn't matter what it is, War Travelers, just getting that basic gear from those bosses. Bosses have the best odds to drop that kind of gear. I have a best farming area, ultimate farming guide as well that I'll be updating on YouTube again shortly, and it kind of talks about like what the strengths of different areas are. Well, it doesn't talk about it; it shows it. Literally, it's just a crazy Excel spreadsheet, which I'll show you guys how to use. It's insane stuff that I've spent a lot of time on. But anyway, long story short, the builds that are towards the top on this list tend to be better at farming some of those things that are really good for generating that starting gear, and Blizzard Sorcerers is just too good. Hydra Sorceress can destroy Andariel even faster, and in some ways might even be safer approach to killing Hell Mephisto as well, but it does struggle in some other areas. Without damage, it can't clear cows as efficiently, and Travanquil is kind of a no-go. It can do Stony Tomb, though, with no gear, and Blizzard Sorceress can do Ancient Tunnels with no gear. So Hydra Sorceress is still very effective, and in some ways more effective and safer at doing some of those best tasks in the early game, killing those ultra hard bosses. That is why you're going to see Hydra Sorceress as being a really top tier starting approach. Fireball Meteor, same thing though. And now that Stony Tomb is a new farming area, I would say that maybe it came up a tier in terms of its ability to start, because now it has a max level area it can farm in addition to Dariel and Mephisto. And it's a really solid approach in that way as well. Still fire damage, still a sorceress, fast teleport. You get teleport to start with, really high mobility, doesn't require much gear. That's pretty much a defining feature of all of these sorceress builds. All these sorceress builds. All right, so another very important one, and this one, just like these can be pretty good in team play, Blizzard Sorcerers especially can be good in team play because of cold mastery. And cold damage is just really good even in higher player count. But these can also do a ton of damage in high player count as well. The way Fist of the Heavens works, though, is you can actually get Conviction Aura or Salvation Aura, and you can help out the team, giving them tons of res or reducing the monster's resistances a ton. And you can make everyone do tons of damage, and you yourself can solo do tons of damage. Virtually no gear. Devil Spirit, any area that is only just flooded with demons and undead, like Chaos, for instance, this thing's gonna tear up Hell Chaos from the very beginning of the game. And it's great to have on the team because of all that extra damage you can get from Conviction Aura. It's just crazy stuff. Fist of the Heavens is looking like it's at the top. It's at the top of the list on both the ladder start and the late game tier list for a reason. Really solid approach. Support Barbarians. So this is just, if you have if you're multi-boxing or whatever, you can just make a Barbarian on another account. But this is how strong of an approach this is. Having battle orders is just so important for your team, and it makes things go so much smoother on a team. And if you're on a team, you can also use Find Item and get more items, and you can use Leap and Grimward and boost people's damage. It's just such a strong support build. So making a Barbarian in some capacity, whether it's a multi-account or just being a dedicated Barbarian for the team, is really key to starting out on the ladder. Very cool stuff. So once we move out of the S tier on the ladder start tier list, we start to see builds that maybe falter a little bit in terms of maybe their overall effectiveness at starting in a ladder. Maybe they can't do as many tasks as well. Like Firewall Sorceress basically does Fireball and Meteor Sorceress things, but now it's very limited to just being really strong at killing bosses. So if you're going to want to make it like a Stony Tomb Farmer that actually feels like it's a good Stony Tomb Farmer and not super clunky, you're going to need to respec it. So it's just still a very strong starting approach, but it's lacking some things. Still has the high mobility. Frozen Orb just doesn't do as much damage as Blizzard, so it's kind of lacking a little bit in that starting out capacity, which is just really good stuff in general. Meteor Frozen Orb Sorceress is really good at clearing more areas, but it does once again less damage, and it's just a bit more clunkiness in delivering the damage sometimes, but it's really effective at starting out in the early game. Sorceresses, once again, tend to rule the top of this list, especially if it's fire or cold damage. Fire damage, you just get a ton of fire damage, and cold damage, you get cold mastery, so you can break cold resistances. You have so much mobility and so much damage with no gear. It's just really crazy stuff. Just how it is in Diablo 2. Unless you remove teleport, which I don't recommend because it's such a fun skill and such a unique skill. It really makes Diablo 2 Diablo 2. You're not going to fundamentally change the early game meta in terms of sorceress power. Blessed Hammer, though. Blessed Hammer Paladin. And you might ask, why is this not in the S tier with Fist of the Heavens? Well, It needs concentration aura to be effective to deal as much damage as Fist of the Heavens, but Fist of the Heavens doesn't need that. And Conviction even helps the initial lightning damage on Fist of the Heavens, in addition to helping out all your elemental builds with their damage, or even providing more defensive power. So Blessed Hammer depends on having concentration aura early on, and it isn't the most useful team aura early on. So it definitely reduces a little bit of its team synergy effectiveness. It also has to get closer to the monsters in most cases to deal damage effectively, and it requires a lot more positioning than the Fist of the Heavens Paladin. And because of all that, it even requires maybe a little bit more items to become similarly as powerful as Fist of the Heavens. But that all being said, it is still very effective and more effective once the game progresses at clearing very high player count, arguably. That is a bit of an arguable point, but yeah, it's still a very solid build. Magic damage, does a lot of damage with no gear. Double Spirit, Blessed Hammer is still very good at clearing a lot of areas. Early game, Travancore. You can pull off Chaos, maybe the Pit. You can even kill bosses with it as well. If you hybridize with Smite, you definitely can do that as well. So nothing wrong with starting your hammered in approach still, but it might not be quite as good in as many scenarios when you're starting out on the patch 2.4 ladder. And yeah, it's just the way it is, man. And Smite Paladin. So you might wonder, why is Smite on a ladder start tier list? You can't start as a Smiter, can you? Well, you can start building a Smiter from like the first week. And within the first week, you can gather smiting, you can gather a black foil, and you can literally start killing Ubers. Day 1, day 2. And if you can start farming those torches, you will be able to afford whatever characters you want very quickly. Hellfire torches are very valuable. So starting out making a smiter from the get-go is a very effective strategy. It might not be as consistent, and it might be more challenging than just going for the sorceress approaches or the more reliable support approaches. But it is a very effective starting approach. Lightning Fury Amazon. Shreds the cows, shreds the pit with no gear. Can shred players 1 cows with a 40 attack speed weapon, not even Titans. As long as you put a couple in your inventory, shop a few of them, you're good to go. And it shreds high density from the very beginning of the game. And once it gets gear, high player count, and even areas that have lightning immunes are no problem. So this build is incredibly good at starting to farm runes and whatnot very early on. And then, of course, you have the Shockwave Summon Druid, which arguably became even stronger in patch 2.4 because of the buffs to the summons. The summons are a lot tankier now, and even have cold damage on the Spirit Wolves, so they have some crowd control. Really, really good stuff. And having a really powerful Oak Sage is kind of like Battle Orders. Battle Orders and the other support functions on a Barbarian might be more important and might be stronger and more effective, especially just teleporting on a Sorceress. But if you're playing in a group doing Chaos runs and Bale runs, this is going to make things like 10 times easier. Just having all this extra health, having Shockwave on a Bear Druid, just being able to stun monsters, getting a lot of summons is face tanking stuff. It's just really good stuff. Very strong support approach, but it is a pure support approach early on. All right, once we move into the B tier, these builds start to lose significant effectiveness in terms of being a starter in Diablo 2, just in general. They're still effective though. So once we're in the B tier, I would still say these builds are solid still. Lightning Sorceress is solid but limited. It's very good for farming Arcane Sanctuary from the get-go. If you want to farm the Ghosts of the Super Chest, it can even do Eldritch Shank, Pendleskin, and it can do some limited farming of some areas like the Pit, and of course there's Ruined Temple, which is good for lightning characters with no gear. But you have to pretty much avoid lightning immunities completely until you get Infinity on a Lightning Sorceress, so you're going to be limited as to what you can farm. It does a decent amount of damage though. Assassin's pretty similar situation. Assassin might be better than the Light Sorc in some ways, but she doesn't have as much mobility. She can clear light immunes though with Corpse Explosion. but she really gets big damage boosts in the late game, and her damage in some situations is definitely lacking in the party early on. It just has a lot of utility, but it's still solid. Bone Necro. Bone Necro, this is probably the strongest the Necromancer gets as a starter, because Bone does the most damage early on and can help get those Corpse Explosion chains started, and can help you kill bosses early on, even with really weak gear. Wind Druid. So unlike the support Druid, if you're just going pure wind, it's definitely a lot slower in terms of getting your gear up, killing those bosses, doing things of that nature. But it's still okay, it's still okay. Fire Fissure Druid, same thing, kind of lack of mobility, but you can clear things like Stony Tomb, and cows will get dropped from a starter Fissure Druid early on. Not as fast maybe as the Lightning Fear Amazon, but it's really strong stuff. So you can still farm cows even from the very beginning, pretty much with no gear. And Berserk Barbarian, you can also farm with pretty much no gear. You get like a teleport staff, and you can Zerk Pindleskin, you can Zerk Eldritch, Shank. You can even get started on a Berserk Barbarian for killing Travancore pretty early on. And it's great to have in a team too, because then you get fine item as well on top of that, and battle orders. So barbarians are always a pretty big boon. It's good stuff. And yeah, with all the effectiveness of spamming abilities, by the way, Fire Druid's looking even better as a starter. So definitely some things changing here because of patch 2.4. Lightning Strike wouldn't really been a thing before 2.4. It's its own build tree and skill setup now. So that's really, really effective stuff just overall. Really good stuff. And yeah, it's good. It's very, 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 very good. I like it a lot. It's very effective. Not as effective as Lightning Fury, though. So once again, it's kind of an even more limited Lightning Sorceress, if that makes any sense. Now we're getting into builds that if you start out as them, there's things you can do, like you can clear cows and Plague Javelin. Not a lot else you can do. Some things you can do, though. Freezing Arrow. Plague Javelin, of course, getting some big boosts because of patch 2.4, which is why it's higher up on the late game tier list as well. But, it's still limited. Freezing Arrow is kind of limited to cows, that kind of stuff. Wake of Fire, Assassin, Stony Tomb, cows, but not as fast as, a Fissure Druid, for instance, without gear. Summon Necromancer without gear definitely can kill bosses, and if you teleport and stack all your summons on one spot, you definitely can blow up stuff and get Corpse Explosion changes. Corpse Explosion charges, and blow everything up and whatnot. You can definitely get that going. But Bone Necromancer just does it cleaner. And, Warcry Barbarian, you can start out with that. And honestly, this is the speedrunning approach for a Barbarian. It's pretty much the best you can do on a Barbarian, with absolutely nothing whatsoever. So as long as you have a weak ass weapon, like maybe Unbending Will, which is the new weapon in 2.4, you can make Berserk work. But Warcry you can make with pretty much nothing, and it can do the same thing as the Berserk Barbarian, but it's slower. It doesn't do that much. It definitely takes a while to kill things sometimes. Enchant Sorceress. Enchant Sorceress is a decent support build. If you are supporting physical builds, which is, those aren't the optimal builds to begin with starting out, because, they're very weapon dependent typically. But if you're supporting physical builds, Enchant Sorceress is really good. It's also really good for getting new characters going and started. So don't underestimate the power of just maxing out Enchant on a Sorceress and helping out your team clear things with melee damage, making new characters, rushing new characters with Enchant. Very, very good approach for sure. And then once you go into D and F, these builds down here, some of them have made new appearances. I wouldn't have even put these on here without 2.4, like Throw Barbarian, Summon Druid, and whatnot. Some of these builds wouldn't even be on here if it weren't for patch 2.4. But that being said, they're still pretty clunky stuff. When you don't have a lot of plus skills, Summon Druid's gonna be really slow. Poison Nova Necromancer, you can clear the pit. You can do some things with without tons of gear, but there's just a lot of things you can't do, and it could be a lot more challenging for a new player to figure out how to do it. The way I see like some of these bottom builds is like they might also be challenging for like a newer player to figure out how to start out with as well. They're maybe a bit more complicated. Like Poison Nova Necro, you could maybe even put in the C category, but it takes a lot to know how to make it useful early game. So it definitely takes some mechanical knowledge. Um, Definitely some things are in here for that reason. Maybe they're weapon dependent, highly weapon dependent. Physical builds tend to be in this category. Highly weapon dependent, highly weapon dependent, highly weapon dependent. Holy Fire Paladin, just pure. I mean, it's just one of the slowest fire approaches when you don't have gear. So once again, this is ladder start. And then, once you get into like highly weapon dependent stuff and stuff that has really limited use in terms of clearing those like beginning bosses and whatnot. This is kind of what you get at. Just some of the slower or the slowest approaches, things you can still do. I like to emphasize anything in the F tier, just like with the late game tier list, you can still make, and it will be effective in some scenarios. But it's out of all the builds, they're the most challenging to really make effective when you don't have a lot of gear. And they are capable of still killing bosses. They're capable of doing things and farming, but they're going to be slower than all the rest of the builds. So all the builds that are here are still capable of starting out. They're just slower, clunkier. It's just going to take a lot longer to start out with an F tier build than an S tier build, like a lot longer, like orders of magnitude longer, like 5 times longer. That's kind of what we're thinking here. So maybe even 10 times longer. So you just have to kind of keep that in mind. Like you can play these for sure, but it's just going to be a bit more challenging. All right, so those are the 2 really important tier lists. So the rest of these are task-specific tier lists for the most efficient means of gathering wealth in Diablo 2 and building your empire. Farming up for more characters and building up your one character, leveling up, getting experience, going to 99. These are going to be the most important things that you're going to want to look for. But for everything else, these are the important tasks that will get you there. And so knowing which builds are strong at doing, killing Ubers, density destroying, elite hunting, and chaos prep is important. Smite is still on top, arguably. I mean, it's just the cheapest, most consistent way to kill the Ubers, period. For killing the Ubers. So yeah, this is the Uber tier list now. I'll just go over that real quick. So that's pretty much it. The rest of these builds in the A tier, there might be some new ones like Lightning Strike, because Charge Strike is so ridiculous. If you wear like an Infinity Spear, you can even kill Uber Mephisto using double plagues on an Act 5 mercenary to proc lower resist because it can break his lightning immunity. Same thing with Lightning Fury. Really strong at killing Uber bosses. You do need gear for this though. And without gear, you can still kill D-Clone pretty easily, and you can kill mini Ubers, but you might struggle more with the big Ubers. Dragon Talon, kind of the same thing there. Just need a bit more gear, but arguably all these approaches are actually faster than a Smiter once you get gear. They're just not as consistent, and they require a lot more gear. So Smite is still just stupid broken for killing the Ubers, just super simple stuff. Zeal Paladin, weapon dependent, that kind of stuff. Definitely needs a lot more gear than just Smite. It actually requires attack rating, but it's still insanely strong. Zeal Sorceress, insanely strong, kind of the same thing. Dream Paladin, all these approaches are really strong at killing the Ubers. And then you have your B tier approaches. So one thing I'd like to highlight, there's actually a couple things I'd like to highlight here in the C tier that are really different. Patch 2.4, kind of like I highlighted Lightning Strike and Lightning Fury's ability to kill Uber Mephisto now using a specialized Act 5 mercenary, and killing the boss is arguably the fastest. Well, another thing I'd like to emphasize here is Lightning Sorcerers can do the same thing for the same reason using Charged Bolt. And then you also have Summon Druid. Now, Summon Druid with Reaper's Toll and whatnot, if you summon all the summons and you have pretty high skill level, you can clear the Uber bosses pretty easily. Summon Druid can solo the big Ubers. I've tested this. It's solid stuff. Maybe not as fast as these approaches, but it's pretty consistent. Same thing with Lightning Sorceress. Maybe lacks a little bit of consistency or tankiness compared to some of these builds. Tankiness does matter a bit too. Like survivability is somewhat important. Summon Necromancer are kind of the same thing as Summon Druid, but you can kill them even faster than the Summon Druid. But unlike the Summon Druid, you need to farm up Urdar monsters, Crushing Blow monsters beforehand. So it's not better than the Summon Druid, but it's not worse. There's just different pros and cons. Rearbear Sorceress would have still been in the A tier along with the rest of these Dream rune word based approaches and the Zeal Paladin and whatnot, but because of the drop in attack speed, she's not quite as effective as she used to be, so it's a B tier approach now. Yeah, that loss of the shape-shifting attack speed really hurt those non-druid shapeshifters. That's the key, non-druid shapeshifters. Definitely come down a bit due to patch 2.4. And then we got Fury Druid, Frenzy Barbarian. Those are, they're pretty much where they still were. These have always been like B tier uber killing approaches, pretty solid, but not as solid as these approaches, not as much DPS, maybe a little bit less consistent. Same thing now, once we get to C tier, we're definitely getting to less consistent approaches here. That being said, I'd say Jab is probably the most consistent of all the builds in the C tier. Like, it's pretty solid stuff. Jab's pretty solid. You can make an argument for it even being in the B tier because you don't need as much gear. But yeah, it's pretty solid stuff. These are all solid uber killing approaches. And once we get into the D tier, I would say these are builds you can kill the ubers with. But they are not builds that maybe... It's pretty much builds you would kill the ubers with if you had nothing else available. If you had nothing else available, use the meteor approach. The meteor approach is pretty challenging, but you can do it. Firewall, definitely possible. Definitely possible to kill the ubers with Firewall. Werewolf Barbarian. Yeah, you can still do it with the Werewolf Barbarian, even though it got a lot slower. And the Maul Druid. The Maul Druid is just, yeah, I mean, you could do it with a Bear Druid as well. It's just a lot slower. Once again, just slower attack speed. A lot of clunkiness coming out in the D tier. There is no F tier for any of these specialized lists because the philosophy goes that, if it's a build that should be used for this function, would be effective at doing this, having an F tier for that doesn't make a lot of sense. It's like you're saying, oh, well, why even bother, killing ubers with an F tier build, because if it's that bad, it's probably not functional, for at least what you're trying to do with it. Unlike in the latter start, where it's like, well, there's a lot of builds you can start with, but it's useful to at least say, there's a lot of builds you can play in the late game with, but it's useful to have them there just to show that, yeah, I mean, you can start with it. You can play these builds in the late game as well, but, they definitely lack effectiveness compared to everything. So it's just more versatility and more overall assessment versus specialized assessment. So yeah, there's no F tier here. Also no F tier in the density destroying tier list, which this one, once again, is concerned with clearing lots of monsters in high player count. So player 7. And yeah, it's really, really important to get that stuff going there. Really, really good. So yeah, for density destroying though, these are builds that basically blow up a room as fast as possible and that are versatile at blowing up a room. Not just like one area like cows, for instance. If they can only do one area, it definitely gives them a bit of a ding. But overall, it's about high player count density farming. It's the speed of destroying a room in high player count, lots of party, a full party, and getting tons of items from monsters. And you can do this solo on single player. You can do this with other people in BattleNet. You can stack a game with your multi-boxes, whatever. But you get the idea. Good stuff, good stuff. Anyway, we got the S tier. These are the 2 top density clear builds in the game. You could even make an argument that Light and Fury is the undisputed top density clearing build in the game, but it's a lot of lightning damage. It's just some physical damage, whereas Poison Nova can clear absolutely everything with 3 types of damage. Poison Nova is a little slower, but it clears just as effectively, and in some cases it clears a lot faster than the Lightning Fury Amazon. So they are the king and queen respectively of density clearing, pulling out as many items and just killing as many monsters as possible. And killing as many monsters as possible is the name of the game when it comes to farming runes, charms, gems, jewels, jewelry, and rune word bases, things of that nature. That is the name of the game. If you want those types of items, you want to kill as many monsters as possible, especially in certain areas like cows. Um, you want to clear like as many ghosts as you can in arcane, as many monsters in the pit. Doesn't matter what it is, or chaos, whatever. That is the name of the game here. So that is what they do, and they're insanely effective at it. All of the builds in A tier, I would say Fire Druid definitely went up a tier here. It just blows up players 8 so effortlessly once it has a full build. Um, but it is purely or mostly fire damage, and is still not quite as good at blowing up a room as like these two builds. Same thing with Plague Javelin, just not quite as fast, maybe a bit more restricted in the areas it can farm, like cows and pit. Lightning Sorceress, Lightning Sentry Assassin, kind of the same thing. Um, not quite as fast at blowing up a room as these builds, but still very effective at doing so in most areas. Summon Necromancer doesn't lower everyone's HP before using Corpse Explosion, so it's a little slower than Poison Nova at doing that. Blessed Hammer and Fist of the Heavens, kind of the same thing here with these two builds. They're just a little slower at clearing the density compared to these builds overall, but they're still very fast. And Lightning Strike, same thing. It's just a touch below that Lightning Fury for sure. And definitely based on my testing with 2.4 Infinity Spear and whatnot, it's looking really good, but not quite at the highest level for killing density. And then you got Freezing Arrow Amazon, Fireball Meteor Sorceress, Bone Spear Necromancer, just slightly lower or less effective approaches. Freezing Arrow is insanely good at clearing density, but it's just pure cold damage. And it's slower than some of these other approaches, or maybe more limited in the areas it can farm. I think you guys kind of get the idea though. Like Nova is still really good at clearing density, but once you get to like really high player count, it really starts to fall off, especially compared to like a Lightning Sorceress. Even if you use Static Field and Nova and whatnot, use the proper combination. So it's really, 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 really tough stuff. And then, Corpse Explosion, harder to get the Corpse Explosion chain started with just pure Corpse Explosion or Bone Spear Necromancer. So as you can see, there's definitely some situations here to think about. And yeah, so goes all the way in there. Good stuff. And then then you get to some approaches that aren't really super meant for clearing density, but they can. So you can clear monsters in higher player count. They're just significantly slower. We really start to slow down quite a bit once we get to C tier. Yeah, like Holy Fire is really good at clearing density, but in lower player counts. So you're not getting as many items per second, because the monsters aren't dropping as many items in the lower player counts. But once you get to like players 8, it actually kind of struggles with clear density. So that's something to keep in mind with a lot of these builds. Even in patch 2.4, that is all the case. And once you get to the C tier, once again, though, you're really starting to slow down quite a bit. Or you're really limited in what it can do, like the Rabies Druid, which is still a lot slower as well. So you can clear a lot of monsters, but it really starts to slow down. Like Zeal, Throw, Barbarian definitely can clear quite a few monsters, but it's really quite a bit of a slowdown when Druid, especially in high player count. But you can do it. You can do it. And once you see like the D tier here, these are builds that can clear density to some extent, but not some of the better ones. And then any build that really can't clear density at all isn't even on here. So. For instance, I don't think the Berserk Barbarian is on here, and that's because if you've ever tried hacking away at a herd of anything with Berserk, it's just not very fun. So these are builds that can do it to some extent, and these are the bottom of the barrel. All right, and then another very important task in Diablo 2 is being able to kill the elite packs. Depending on the area, there's a lot of new level 85 areas in patch 2.4, including Stony Tomb, Swampy Pit, Ruined Temple. Some of those temples are new 85 areas, Icy Cellar, Sewers, Arachnid Lair, it's another very important one as well. And so all of those areas are going to be like the top 85 farming areas for elite hunting. So all of these builds can quickly target and execute those elites with high amounts of magic find maybe, and find item definitely influences this tier list quite a bit because barbarians can get another item very quickly, which makes them very efficient at magic finding and only targeting elites. Um, this is a very effective farming strategy. It is the most effective farming strategy if you were playing in Players 1, just targeting elites or bosses of all kinds, because the rest of the monsters just don't drop very many items. So if you're playing a solo, this is a very important tier list to pay attention to. Very high attention should be paid here. All right, so we got the Berserk Barbarian. Berserk Barbarian is the undisputed champion of this tier list. He just pops an elite monster and then uses find item, can stack over 700 magic find, has the fastest teleport frames in the game, like a sorceress does. Once you have Enigma, it's crazy stuff. Very effective build. If you don't know how to farm effectively on Players 1, highly recommend checking out this build guide. Just click on the link once it's on Maxroll, and you're gonna be good. You'll have a lot easier of a time being an efficient magic finder in Diablo 2. And then of course you have the Fireball, Meteor Sorceress, the Lightning Sorceress, Fireball, Blizzard Sorceress, Fireball, Nova Sorceress, pretty much all the sorceresses, except for maybe some of them that don't always hit the elite as quickly, maybe a little bit clunkier in terms of its execution, are all going to be in the A tier, just below the Berserk Barbarian. They don't have find item, but they also can stack just as much magic find, if not more in some cases. Well, I don't know about more, but it's pretty similar. They move around quicker though because they're not spending time to use find items, so they're just popping elites instantly, one-shotting them. Foe Barbarian does the same thing, but it has find items, so it's a little bit slower than the sorceresses, but it has find item. And it's very clean at targeting the elites now with all that pierce and all that damage. Fist of the Heavens, very clean, and with 125 faster cast rate, really cleanly kills them. You can get tons of magic find on this build as well, and you can hit them from afar, so you don't have to have precise tele stomping or anything like on the Blessed Hammer Paladin, which definitely I'd say is much more suited to density clearing, the hammered in. Higher player count and whatnot. You can definitely still elite target with it, but definitely starts to get a little bit clunkier as we go down to the B tier. Blizzard doesn't always hit the elite right away, so there's some clunkiness there. Hydra takes some it's got a little bit of uptime compared to like a Fireball Sorceress. Warcry, definitely doesn't do quite as much damage, and sometimes doesn't insta kill the elite, so it's a little bit slower. Fire Blast, kind of like just slower, faster, slower teleport speed, really. Mostly hurting the Fire Blast Assassin, but it's still pretty solid. Summon Necromancer, same thing, kind of. You also have to, get your summons going. But Summon Druid can almost always one-shot everything in Players 1. Unlike the Summon Druid, which one-shots some things in some areas, like the Pit. So... really good stuff. Fissure Fire Druid, pretty much one-shot everything in Players 1 as well. A little bit more clunkiness, though. Especially in Ancient Tunnels, once you get a full set of gear, it's just really effective. Dragon Talon Assassin, you can just target with Rift. Really good stuff. Leap Attack Barbarian, same thing. Leap Attack, though, just doesn't always hit like Berserk. It's just a lot clunkier, basically. And sometimes you have to use Berserk anyway. And then Nova Sorceress, pretty good at elite targeting. It's a Sorceress, doesn't always one-shot, though, unlike these ones. So in Players 1 targeting, it also only has lightning damage. So it definitely not quite as much damage. So just slightly less effective approaches at just insta-killing those elite packs and that elite monster. And then once you get down to C tier, these approaches are effective at targeting elite monsters. Strangely enough, just tele-stomping with all your summons is really good on a Summon Druid in patch 2.4. Frost Nova does enough damage to be pretty effective in Ancient Tunnels. Arguably, maybe even one of the most effective approaches in some areas like Ancient Tunnels. Bone Necromancer, just a little bit less consistent there for targeting these elites and stacking Magic Find. because you actually need a lot of plus skills on that build to make it work. A lot slower teleport on a Wind Druid. Same thing with the Dream Paladin, really. Just slower teleport on some of these approaches. Really, that's really what it comes down to. Maybe you're stuck in an animation like with Zeal, but it's still pretty solid. Whirlwind, a little bit of an animation there, even if you're doing short whirlwinds. Frenzy, Firewall, they got that cooldown problem, so there's a lot of elites in an area. It definitely gets a little dicey. Lightning Fury, just slower teleport. It's pretty much the only thing that brings it down on this list. Still an effective way to do it, though. And of course, maybe a little bit lack of Magic Find. And then, lack of Magic Find, maybe no teleport in some cases here. Unless you're going in and out of shape-shifting form, which is even clunkier. So yeah, that's pretty much what you're looking at in the D tier, or maybe where you're using other skills. You have to charge it up, like with Phoenix Strike. No find item, not everything one shots with the Whirlwind Assassin. Yeah, it starts to get a lot clunkier once you enter the D tier, and that's pretty much it for that one. And then for the last one and the simplest one, we'll do the Chaos Prep tier list as an overview, and that's pretty much it. I know I kind of lied and said I wouldn't kind of go over every build individually. I didn't go over every build individually, but there's definitely some major hitting points in 2.4, and just in general to help the community understand Maxroll's logic for their tier lists. Which I did a lot of work constructing the initial versions and whatnot, and the team did a lot of work trying to verify, making sure they're all really solid, and we all had a mutual understanding of like how strong these builds are and kind of what might ding them and what might bring them up on the lists and whatnot. So yeah, I went over a little bit more, maybe I should have, but it's still a pretty short video. We're looking like over an hour and 10 minutes, which is pretty short for me. Honestly, for a tier list, I like to go pretty in depth, so you guys can have the highest quality information possible, and you guys can be confident in that information, that you're not being trolled. There's definitely a lot of people that rate things or tier things, a lot of other people. Don't want to call out anyone in particular, just overall in the community. That rates things due to how fun they are, or maybe just smashes all of these considerations together, and maybe versatility is the only concern of the build. But we try to give you guys different tier lists with different criteria so you guys can kind of make your own assessments. And we try to split up the criteria as much as possible and to take as much into account as possible in order to build you guys the very best tier lists. So it's a lot of work going on here, a lot of good stuff. But for Chaos Prep, basically what it comes down to is spawning Diablo as fast as possible in a full game. And there's different considerations due to immunities, like lightning immunities when they show up, or cold immunities kind of slow down the Blizzard Sork or the Light Sork a bit. These builds do magic damage, and they just easily target and kill elites in high player count. That's really what it comes down to. For Berserk, Fist of Heavens, and Blessed Hammer, maybe physical immunity can slow down some of these builds, even though they're good at targeting. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of things that go into that, but that's pretty much the general overview of this list. I don't have to go too much into this as well. Once again, you guys can access all of these lists. Guys can access all of these lists here in the links below. And I hope I explained the tier list well. I hope we gave really high levels of justification. A lot of people just give you a tier list and slap it on and be like, here's the tier list, and they won't explain why it's in a tier, or they won't have very strict criteria for what determines it, and how builds move up and down according to patch changes and whatnot. But I assure you guys that Maxroll tier lists are the most definitive and the most useful in terms of understanding late game power, ladder start power, and everything else. So we definitely are very careful with these, and I hope you guys enjoy. First pinned comment in the description will have the timestamps and everything. We'll also have the link to this guide itself, and of course, I'll also have a link to where the tier list will appear as of like April 23rd, 24th on Maxroll itself. Maxroll has tons of build guides as well, tons of resources like the D2 Planner, where you literally can visually plan out your build before you create it. Really insane stuff on Maxroll. So anyway, guys, I hope you guys enjoy this list. I hope you guys enjoy these lists, I should say. Enjoy this really awesome info coming in right before patch 2.4 launches. And I will see you guys very soon with some more defining ladder guides, including the best farming area ultimate farming guide. You guys are definitely going to want to check out that one. If you ever had a question about where to farm on any build with any level of gear, looking for any type of item, that's the one you're going to want to get. Definitely going to want to check that one out for sure. We already have a version from patch 2.3 already on YouTube, which you can already check out, which is pretty awesome stuff. But yeah, like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video, and you can always check me out at twitch.tv/Dark Humility for 6 to 7 days a week of awesome Diablo 2 content. We're going 7 days a week, 16 plus hours if I can stay alive for the ladder reset, going hard on hardcore. But anyways, yeah, guys, heck good stuff. GG and Dark Humility. Over and out. See you guys next time. Let's get it.